This is great honor for me to welcome our guest today, Ambassador of Japan to Georgia, Imamura Akira. And it's a great honor for Ilia State University to host his lecture on Japan's post-Second World War success and the challenges that the country is facing today. Ambassador Imamura has became the ambassador of Japan to Georgia in 2020, but he has tangible experience of diplomatic career in different countries, including in Australia, Great Britain, in Canada, in Russia. He's a graduate of Tokyo and Columbia universities. And I'd like to use this opportunity, dear Ambassador, and to express my sincere gratitude towards you, towards the Embassy of Japan in Georgia for your strong efforts to strengthen the relations, economic, cultural, diplomatic ties between our countries. Japan is definitely the role model for the whole world, I would say, and especially, of course, for Georgia, especially in terms of the achievements that Japan has in various fields. Also, I'd like to use this opportunity and welcome our audience. These are mostly students and our colleagues mostly from the fields of political science and international relations, and not only. Thank you for your interest and for your participation. And now, before I pass the floor to Ambassador, I'd like to make a very short technical remark. So the lecture itself will last for approximately 1 hour, and then we will have approximately half an hour for questions, answers, and discussions. And I'd encourage you to actively engage in that part of our meeting as well. So, dear Ambassador, thank you once again for your time, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to talk to your students. Ilia University, which I visited in April, is a wonderful university, and in your country, one of the leading universities in Georgia to provide studies in international relations. So it's a great honor for me to speak in front of you today. I am a professional diplomat ever since I graduated my university. I also studied international relations, and I was a student when it was 1989 when there was a renewal of Cold War between the Soviet Union and the West, and Japan was part of the Western camp. So in Tokyo, being a student in Tokyo, we were feeling that the nuclear missiles, intermediary range nuclear missiles deployed in the Far East was targeted towards Japan. So when I joined the Foreign Service as a diplomat in 1984, I had to choose one language of my study. It could be English, French, German, Spanish, Chinese, and Russian. But because of this heightened tension between the East and the West, and because Russia, like Georgia, was my neighbor, I decided to choose Russian as my language of study. So when I went to the United States in 1986, I was mostly speaking in Russian. I went there to study Russian, not to study English. So, and also, as a professor introduced me, I was a student at Columbia University in New York City, which had a very good Russian Studies Institute. And there, I was mostly speaking in English, but the subject I was studying was not the United States, but the Soviet Union. So that's how I got my job, and I was trained to be a diplomat specializing in the Soviet Union or former Soviet Union states. So I'm very happy that this time I have appointed as an ambassador to your wonderful country last December, and discuss with you most important matters of our mutual interest and mutual concern. So let me briefly talk about today's subject in general terms. I will be talking about Japan's post-war success, and the professor said World War II. For us, war is World War II, but it's interesting that the professor said World War II. We always say war is World War II, although we experienced indirectly some other wars like Korean War or war in Iraq and so forth. But here my subject matter is post-Second World War, success of Japan and current challenges. Why I chose this subject is that most of the Georgians who I have met so far, almost without any exception, talked about Japan's success in post-war era, which actually ended probably somewhere around in the middle of 90s when the Soviet Union actually collapsed, and part of which Georgia is. But then almost coincidentally, we started to feel a lot of challenges, which in Georgia may not be well aware of. So I want to present why we today, in my first part, why we're successful, because many people say we're successful, but not many people don't understand why we were successful. So I will talk about why in my first part. And then in my second part, regarding the challenges after 1990s we're facing right now, probably many people in Georgia don't know what kind of challenges we're facing and how we're trying to cope with it. So I'll be talking about what and how. Okay, let's move on to the first part. So I'll be talking about three aspects of our success: national character, economic conditions, and security and defense. The picture here is Tokyo in 1945. It was bombed totally by United States, so it was like flat, almost nothing except for big buildings. But in this lower picture, you see Tokyo in 2000s. It's totally different. So you could see in around 60 years of time, Japan has developed so much. But we don't, ourselves included, Japanese ourselves included, don't necessarily don't know why we were so successful. So first I'll talk about national character. Strong discipline and industrial people, collectivism, focus on education, and national goals. Maybe these four factors. First two are about ourselves, about Japanese. Strong discipline and industrial people. Why we are so? I think it's related to the second aspect, collectivism. We have in Japanese proverb or saying that if a needle sticks out, then you will be hit. So each individual is a needle. So if you stick out and try to argue that you are you and more than somebody who are average, then you'll be hit by some other people to come back to your original position. That is kind of a typical Japanese character. So we don't show, each Japanese people don't try to show individual, opinion so strongly. Our character is more over harmony. We like harmony. We like consensus building. We avoid open confrontation. So when I was watching Georgian politics, I thought this is very different from Japan. So what we emphasize is the goal of the organization or the group rather than your own goal. You try to put your own goal above the organization's goal. That's our typical way of thinking. And then focus on education. Why we focus on education? Maybe I start from here. Because we don't have natural resources other than human beings. We don't have much gas. We don't have oil. We don't have other natural resources, mainly, like steel or other coal. we used to have a little bit of coal, but it's already gone. So what we were trying, and we still are trying, is to import all those materials, natural resources from abroad. But in order to buy these, we need to earn foreign currency. Maybe same with Georgia. A little bit better placed Georgia is, but in order to earn foreign currency, we needed to export our goods. In order to export our goods, we needed to have a good quality of our exported goods. And in order to achieve good quality, we needed better technology, and we needed, hence, good people. So that's my explanation. And fourth one is national goal. I said collectivism is very strong. In Japan, kind of national goal was set when we lost the war in 1945. It was to catch up the West. So we were trying very hard to catch up. It was almost like Khrushchev in 1960s or 1950s. He said, "Догнать Соединенные Штаты и так далее." So Soviet's goal was to catch up the West and even overtake the West in its development. Maybe totally different context, but for us, it was also saying to catch up the West and, if possible, in some areas to, go ahead of them. Second factor is economic conditions, maybe 4 or 5 of them. First, institutional reforms during US occupation, dissolution of Zaibatsu. We had US occupation from 1945 to 1951 or 52, about 7 years. And during this time, United States helped us in reviving democratic tendencies we used to have before 1930s. Like your first republic, our democracy was heightened in 1910s and 20s. So US wrote the draft of a Japanese constitution, which is still never revised, unlike Georgian current constitution. And they promoted the democratization of Japanese economy and promote free trade as well as market economy. So the dissolution of Zaibatsu is dissolution of kind of monopolized big business groups like conglomerate who used to dominate in our markets before the war or during the war. So that was one. The reform of the economy was the biggest reason. And to the same extent, it was also very important that the expansion of trade based on GATT and fixed exchange rate through Bretton Woods system was very important. GATT is a general agreement on trade and tariffs. So this was created also by US leadership as well as Bretton Woods system. It provided most favored nation status to the members. So if you have a lower tariff amongst the members, new member can enjoy that. And if you have lower tariff, the export-oriented countries like Japan has big advantage. And we joined GATT a little bit later than the original members, which created GATT in right after the war. But by the time of the late 1950s, we joined this system. We contributed to the trade liberalization very much after that. So we're now prominent member of World Trade Organization, WTO, which is the successor to GATT. And fixed exchange rate was designed through a Bretton Woods system, mainly through a creation of the International Monetary Fund. And the fixed rate for 1 yen, Japanese currency, was 360 yen. This is relatively beneficial rating, or rather very good beneficial rate for Japan as we went forward, as we achieved higher growth by 1960s and 70s. And in the 1970s, of course, the Bretton Woods system partially, the fixed exchange rate system partially collapsed. So we never were able to go back to this beneficial rating of $1 to 630 yen, which was fixed. But still, this helped us before the liberalization of exchange rate. And third one is catching up with the West. I already talked about this. We had this goal, national goal, and we're able to use the opportunity to acquire advanced technology from the West. And fourth, quest for quality and efficiency. Customer is God is meaning customer is always right. But this phrase was pronounced by Panasonic CEO, a famous businessman in Japan, whose name is Konosuke Matsushita. So he was like a pioneer in Japanese management, and he, of course, led the huge company Panasonic to become a world giant. And another one is Kaizen. It's a word meaning, a Japanese word meaning improvement. But this is Toyota, the big auto manufacturing company's method of manufacturing the cars. And it was a way of controlling the quality. And through this system that they actually imported from the United States, quality control was imported, but revised and improved by Toyota itself. And then they applied to their manufacturing system. So now it is widely used globally in order to maintain the high quality production and achieve high efficiency, productivity in manufacturing process. And last one is the political stability. It's not economic condition, but it did have great impact, because if you have a unstable political environment, the economy will suffer. But we are lucky to have a liberal democratic party ruling Japan from late 1950s until now, except for maybe 2 years in 1990s and 3 years in late 2000s or early 2010s. So only 5 years exception. The reason is probably LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, was flexible enough to respond to people's needs and promote economic growth policy oriented towards business. That's one, probably the biggest reason. Another reason, many people say that the opposition were not strong enough and advocating a little bit unrealistic policy of Japan's neutrality between East and the West. So that's the political stability. Let's go to the next one, the security and defense. We had Cold War in Asia, and then it turned into a hot war, like Korean War. The North and South Koreas were fighting each other. It was a real war, and it was a civil war in continental China. In 1949, the Communist Party won against Kuomintang, the ruling party right now, or sometimes it doesn't rule because it's democratic system, but of Taiwan. So they fled, the Kuomintang people fled to Taiwan. So China was split into two parts. Of course, Georgia, United States, or Japan recognized Beijing, but because of the civil war, the communist regime was established, and the other part of China, which is still, we call it part of China, we have to be careful, but Taiwan regime, we understand, it's a democratic system is established in Taiwan. So these two wars really significantly draw people's attention that Cold War turned into hot war in Japan. So we have to do something realistically about it. But at the same time, because of the devastation we saw in my first slide, Tokyo was totally flat and people were so devastated about the war in 1945-46. So people had a very strong sense, their desire for peace. So we can call it people's pacifism was very strong. So Prime Minister Yoshida at that time invented so-called Yoshida Doctrine, which focused on economic reconstruction while relying on United States deterrence and promoting a policy of exclusively defense-oriented one by our self-defense forces, which is lightly armed, not heavy armed. So it was coming from Article 9 of our Constitution, was a kind of reflection of our people's pacifism. It said, we renounce all the war, and we will not hold any armed capabilities for that purpose. That was the Article 9, and still is there. We still have this combination of US presence in Japan through Japan-US Security Treaty and self-defense forces under Article 9. So this very realistic combination of the two really helped us continuously defend ourselves, secure ourselves during the Cold War in Asia, while concentrating our resources on mostly on economic reconstruction. Okay, so now I turn to my second part of my presentation, the challenges. So these challenges I write here: rapid aging and slower growth, difficulties of keeping the technological edge, our advanced technologies, because we're catching up with other countries. Third, more challenging security environment. So these three aspects appeared mainly after year 2000. So let's go one by one. First, rapid aging and slower growth. First, look at the right-hand corner. The growth rate of Japan was gradually going down. If you see these figures, 1960s, we used to have more than 10%. And it slowed down gradually. And by 1990s, it went down to 1.52%. And 2000s, it's even below zero. 2010s, we picked up under Prime Minister Abe, who was the Prime Minister until last year, but it stayed around somewhere between 1% and 2%. So these are the slowing down of our growth. And if you look at the blue box, you see the population, and saying that more than 36 million of our population are over 65. It's about 29% of our entire population, which is about 125 million right now. And it's declining by, let's say, around 400 to 500,000 people every year. So roughly about 500,000 every year. It's slightly lower than that, but that's a huge amount of a gradual decrease. And obviously, if you have a less and less population, you will have lower GDP. But it's combined with slower growth, as you see, as I explained to you, it's around 1% to 2%. And because I say here in the blue box, I say deflation. I don't know if ever Georgia has experienced deflation. I'm sure you've been experiencing only inflation almost all the time. Deflation is the opposite of inflation, and you'll be having a lower price every year. It's a good thing, don't you think? If your gas is cheaper next year, then you can save money, but you will actually get nominal terms less GDP next year because of the devaluation of your currency. So if you continue your deflation, you will have the shrinkage of your GDP. So this is a huge problem of any country like that. Why we have deflation? Because we didn't decrease our production capability, whereas our population was declining. So the supply and demand principle of the economy, market economy, worked. That means we are now oversupplying, whereas population consumption of the population becoming less and less. However, despite of the fact that we are declining in terms of our population by 400,000 people every year, you see in 2010s we have 1.28% growth. What does it mean? That means that our per capita GDP is growing. If we're declining and GDP, I mean the per capita GDP is flat, then our growth rate will be lower. It should be minus. But thanks to our efforts, which I'll mention later, our per capita GDP is growing. So this is the blue box. So our response, maybe I would say three responses. One, helping young couples. So that means helping young couples, especially young mothers, to raise their children easily. We give longer maternity leave, nursery for mothers to raise children while they're working. These are the things. It's typical thing for any country like us are doing, but we're doing as well. Number two, increasing overseas investment. I said deflation, slower growth. So we don't have much place for investment within Japan because we have less population. So, but we have a huge potential for investment, huge capability for supply. So what we do, logical answer to this is invest, put the supply capability in other countries where the economy is growing. So I wrote here, made in X by Japan. So made in, let's say, made in China by Japanese company. That's what we do. Made in Vietnam, made in European Union, made in United States, but by Japanese investment. So we harness others' growth. We try to benefit from others' growth, and there will be a return for our investment overseas coming back to Japan, and that benefits our per capita GDP growth and so forth, which I mentioned. Third response, increasing the number of workers. So we have women more working in our labor market. That's another reason why our GDP is not declining. So we are having more workforce in Japanese labor market. That means although we're declining in terms of total population, our working number of population is increasing. So that's another explanation for this growth of 1 to 2%. And then we say temporarily foreign workers. So we're bringing in more and more foreign workers, although it's temporarily. Maybe we're not bringing in huge amounts of immigration right now, but we want to have talented laborers, skilled laborers. So we're allowing that to happen. And we're now virtually opening our labor market to unskilled laborers as well, using other schemes like training them in Japan from developing nations, and then they can work in Japanese companies in Japan after their training period. So that's how we, in order to tackle with the lowering number of population, we try to increase the number of working labor market. And in parentheses, I wrote, while inbound tourism exploding. So this is also good for our economy. Inbound tourism, meaning like in Georgia, people from China, and in case of Georgia, maybe Russians are coming for sightseeing, which I think is very good to understand Georgian culture. So Chinese people, Korean people, other people, US, Europeans, they come to us and spend several days for sightseeing. And that number used to be just 5 or 6 million in the middle of 2000s. Now it's more than 30 million before COVID. So it's 6 or 7 times more. And that means that they spend money for Japanese tourism business or any Japanese business, which is almost reaching around 10% of our GDP. So despite the fact that our population is declining, foreigners, tourists are spending money instead of us, or in addition to us, which is adding up our GDP growth. So our second challenge, we of course are proud of advanced technologies, but because of other countries catching up, it's now getting more and more difficult. So we're doing in response maybe 3 things. 1, focus on upstream global supply chain, then final product. So supply chain has upstream and downstream. Upstream meaning more materials or components, and downstream meaning high products. So if you look at smartphones, we don't make smartphones anymore. Did you ever see Japanese smartphones? You can see it when you go to Japan, but it's not popular. You just see Apple or Google or other Samsung and other brands. So, but if you are, able to open your smartphone and look for inside components, there will be Japanese components. we even go above than component. We go upstream. So we produce materials that makes components. So that's where the strategically decisive capability of any device like smartphone is decided. Apple or any of those companies they demand high quality, and high quality almost always is decided by the material that they use for the components. So we're strategically focusing on that part of any device. So that's one way. And the other way is focus on market share than scale. So what is big now is what is it? Maybe smartphone. Let's say, take another example for market share. Smartphone has huge demand in the world, but our market share is small. Or that's maybe not a good example. Maybe automobile industry. Of course, our automobile industry has the market share, but in order to make automobiles, you need industrial machinery or robotics. So we have more share in industrial machinery, which is machinery that makes machinery. So we're good at that. We have high market share. We have a very high market share in many of the robotics technology, but the scale is very small. You know, the scale is bigger when you look at the final product, which is automobiles, which is made by industrial machinery or robotics. But we're still focused on automobiles, but we are now gradually focusing on the machines that makes machines, right? Actually, we have been having this focus for a long time now. Third, focus on revolutionary technology. So we look long-term, not tomorrow, but day after tomorrow or 1 week from now. So this slide on right-hand below corner is a quantum computing model. It's, I think, computer graphics, but it's a totally different idea of computing. And this kind of new technology is revolutionary. So it's not feasible right now for any commercial companies, but we put a lot of state budget for the investment in this kind of breakthrough technology. Of course, we may fail because there's a high risk of failure, and because of the nature of this kind of technology, I would say this still is worth trying. And last one, the new national goal. I said that we lost national goal because we caught up all the other advanced technology. Vice versa, on the contrary, other people are try to catch us up, and some of them already caught up in many areas like China. But we want to do more by setting up our own goals. So maybe together with other countries, the new goal looks like a carbon neutral society for us. We announced last year, our government headed by Prime Minister Suga, we want to achieve a carbon neutral society by 2050. And this requires a huge, revolution in technology, especially in the area of renewable energy technologies. So this blue car is a hydrogen car. It uses hydrogen, doesn't use gasoline. So as an emission, it doesn't emit any greenhouse gas. It just emits water. So this kind of a revolution technology is already in market. This is sold in Japan, but we need to use it more in order to be popular, and the price of this car, for example, will become cheaper. Okay, so the third challenge that we're now facing is security and an environment. North Korea's nuclear missile threats are really, nuclear and missile threats are real threats for us. And as you see in this picture, they are launching the long-range, mid-range, short-range missiles against the UN sanctions. There is a United Nations Security Council resolution that prohibits the North Korea to launch ballistic missiles. which is a direct threat to many countries, including Japan. And there are programs targeted towards the development of nuclear bombs. They declare that they developed one and they tested one. And they have conducted for a couple times of these nuclear bombs. And many people predict that they are trying to miniaturize the warheads so that they can mount them on these missiles of various ranges. So that's why we are strongly supporting the sanctions against North Korea and cooperating with other partners like United States or South Korea in order for North Korea to abandon its nuclear and missile programs in an irreversible way and verifiable way, total destruction of its program. Another question that we have with North Korea is this abduction issue. In 1970s and later on, there were cases of abduction of Japanese nationals. They were abducted by North Koreans, and presumably, most likely, they have abducted, they detained more than 17 Japanese and brought to North Korea. And they trained them, many of them, well, out of 17 detained, 5 came back to Japan. And they gave some interviews saying that many of them were trained to become a teacher of Japanese language, to teach Japanese to future North Korean spies to be sent to Japan to manipulate, our society. So that was, I think, the motivation for North Korea to abduct these people. Now, third one, attempts, or the second one, attempts to change status quo. You see the island photograph. It's our Senkaku Islands in East China Sea. And Chinese vessels, Chinese government is sending their government vessels to our territorial waters. So it's a little bit like your occupied territory. It's not totally the same, but they send the ships that will come into our territorial waters and they float. So it's total violation of international law. Government vessels are allowed to float, go through the territorial waters of other countries under innocent passage rules. So they have to pass the territorial waters as soon as possible. But in case of this, these waters, they float and stay, despite the fact that our Coast Guard vessels tell them to stay out. And this diagram you see on the right-hand corner is the number of those cases, incidents around these seas in these islands. So it was a small number, and then after 2012-13 period, it increased dramatically, and it stays on like that ever since. So almost weekly, they send their ships. Why? Because Chinese, they think that these islands are theirs. According to their claim, it's their islands. But however, they don't control these islands. They recognize our territorial sovereignty over these islands until relatively recently. So only they started to claim after the resources were found, oil and gas, under the seabed surrounding these islands in 1970s. So before that, there were maps issued by China, which recognized that these are Japanese islands. So they changed their position, but it is actually the challenge to the established order based on international law. So these are the examples of challenges, and what we try to do right now in terms of security and environment. I turn to the next slide. So our response may be just the 2 examples. One is strengthening Japan-US alliance, and the 2, promotion of free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, strengthening Japan-US alliance is a very long-term goal that we are engaged in for many years. But as recent as April last month, our Prime Minister Suga, which is on the left-hand side of this picture, visited Washington, D.C. to meet President Biden, who received Mr. Suga as a first foreign guest after his own administration was established in January to meet him as face-to-face in a format. So they agreed to enhance Japan-US alliance through defense cooperation. Japan also is willing to enhance its own defense capabilities, about which I talked earlier. So this is what we're trying to do. And during this meeting, they agreed, they issued a statement, joint statement, in which it says, among many things, the importance of the application of US-Japan Security Treaty, Article 5, which clearly says that the US is obliged to defend Japan's territory. And in this joint statement, it said that this article will be applied to the islands of Senkaku, about which we saw in the last slide. Or they expressed other things like South China Sea concerns that we share with the United States. Again, unfortunately, it's Chinese attempts to change the status quo. There are the territorial disputes between China, Taiwan, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and other Southeast Asian countries. And there are many islands which is under dispute. But Chinese are trying to use these islands as a military base, changing the status quo by actually constructing air base, for example, on these islands. So this is one example. And of course, you can interpret as from the context of US-China confrontation right now. But also, of course, we are very much concerned about these attempts by the Chinese. So what we agreed with Americans during this important summit meeting is that we need to talk to Chinese straightforwardly about these questions and ask Chinese to take responsibility in order to maintain the order, especially order on the sea, and freedom of navigation in these areas. So since Japan and US are very important trading partners with China, actually China for us is a bigger trading partner than United States. US is number 2 right now. We really look at this, interdependence, which is also for China is very important. So what we would like to pursue is this kind of dialogue with the Chinese, which of course we've been engaged in for some time now. Let's turn to FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific. This is our one of the most important foreign policy vision that Japan promotes together with other countries, including the United States. It has 3 elements here: rule-based maritime order, high standard of free trade agreements, enhance high-quality infrastructure in this region, and cooperate with other partners. So these are 4 elements, in my opinion, that's most important. If you look at the map, here you see Pacific Ocean and Indian Oceans. These 2 oceans are so connected right now, we often call nowadays Indo-Pacific. So that's the region why we're focusing on under FOIP. And if you look at the map, you see red dotted lines. These are the sea lanes. So these sea lanes connect Japan and other countries with, for example, other part of Asia or other regions like Europe. And of course, Georgia is connected. It doesn't show that connection in the Black Sea, but red lines should go through Suez Canal and go to Bosphorus Straits in Turkey and go across the Black Sea and reach ports on the Black Sea coast of Georgia. So we are all connected interdependently. And that's why rule-based maritime order is very important. And we also think high standard free trade agreements are very important. So we recently agreed with Australians, Southeast Asian countries, namely ASEAN countries, India, China, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand. All of us joined in one big kind of gigantic we call mega free trade agreement. Unfortunately, India didn't sign. We say to the Indians that we're open to you. But fortunately, others also signed, including China or South Korea, our neighbors. So we're now, if it goes into force, we'll be connected under this free trade agreement. And this establishes a very good rule in order to engage all the parties involved to maintain this rule-based order in terms of not just only trade, it also touches upon investment and other new types of economic transactions. So that's number two. Number three, enhance high quality infrastructure. So under this concept, we not just only look at sea lane, we also look at ports, which is very important for maritime security. So we help these countries looking at ports to be modernized. It's good for Coast Guard vessels. We help Coast Guard vessels so that they can maintain safe, secure coasts of those countries. We also help not just ports, but also roads or other transportation infrastructure, so that we can benefit from the economic growth that they are experiencing right now. And that expands also to Africa. Actually, Indian Ocean faces, or Africa faces Indian Ocean. So we also help African countries to modernize their infrastructure in a high quality way. And lastly, cooperate with partners. So we promote FOIP vision. We cooperate with the United States to promote this kind of a rule-based, rule-oriented order. We have same discussion with ASEAN countries. Now ASEAN is Association of Southeast Asian Countries. Now ASEAN has its own Indo-Pacific concept. So we highly value this kind of initiative. We have a lot of similarities between our two concepts. And interestingly, now, not just Japan, US, Australia, ASEAN countries, other countries are focusing more on this region. So as late as April this year, European Union publicized its Indo-Pacific strategy for the first time. And I think this is another evidence that EU really values this maritime, rule-based order in this region, because EU also benefits from this interdependence, the sea lane that connects each other, and the free and rule-based order that Europeans benefit globally from. So this is, and since Georgia is now for some time aiming at joining the European Union, I think I'm more than convinced that there's a relevancy to Georgia in terms of these elements that I mentioned under FOIP. So this is our challenge. So lastly, briefly, I would like to touch upon Japan-Georgia relations. First, shared values, support for Euro-Atlantic aspiration. Second, support for territorial integrity of Georgia. Third, official development aid projects and COVID-related assistance. Fourth, promotion of trade and investment. And fifth, culture and people-to-people ties. So let's look at the first one. As I said, we shared the values. The first one, shared values. So democracy, human rights, rule of law, all these values shared between us. Japan and Georgia. So that's forms. You might think this is very obvious, but it's not. Not all countries share this very fundamental values. So it's a very precious thing, this fact that we share these fundamental values. So I'd like to emphasize in the beginning, this is a foundation of our two countries. And as I said here, we support your Euro-Atlantic aspiration. So we want you to be part of the European Union and NATO. NATO and European Union are our partners. We cooperate in different ways. So we want Georgia to be part of these two important organizations. Second, support for territorial integrity of Georgia. You look at the picture near ABL with South Ossetia. ABL is administrative boundary line. So I was there near South Ossetia to observe the areas beyond the wire, where you have the barbed wire, or the fence. Actually, it was a fence, and I saw a Russian FSB soldier behind this fence. And so I could feel and could see with my own eyes how divided, and how difficult for the people within South Ossetia or to Tskhinval to come over to Georgian control side. And so I was very much now more than convinced than ever that our policy of support for territorial integrity within the internationally recognized borders, which is the entire indivisible Georgia as it is, including territory of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, is so precious, and the policy that we should be supporting. So we co-sponsored, for example, in the United States, when Georgia tabled General Assembly UN resolution concerning or expressing concern about the humanitarian situation, human rights situation in those your territory of these two regions. So this is our position. That's the second component of our relations. Third is our official development aid. It's we're assisting, for example, I talked about high quality infrastructure. It's applicable also to Georgia. So we supported part of the East-West Highway near Kutaisi bypass, or the Kutaisi bypass of East-West Highway was financed by Japanese development agency. And recent months, we're providing assistance in terms of COVID. Through Asia Development Bank, we are finalizing the assistance for procuring the equipments for the clinics or hospitals in all over your country in order for Georgia to cope with the current health crisis. Now, fourth one is the picture between me and economic minister, Minister for Economy and Sustainable Development, Naja Turnava, signing the investment treaty between Japan and Georgia. This will set the framework of legal framework for promotion of trade and the investment, actually trade promotion of the investments. Actually, coincidentally, one of the big investment decision was made recently by a big energy giant, which is called TEPCO, which decided to invest in one of the hydropower plants, in Dalyari hydropower plant near Kazbegi mountain, near the border with Russia, so that we can gain experience in your energy field. And I'm sure this kind of investment will increase in the future. Fifth one, culture and people-to-people ties. This is a bonsai online lecture we did in March, and there's a Georgian specialist in bonsai. He is self-educated bonsai specialist and growing this kind of bonsai you see on the screen. So we asked him to do a special presentation online about how to make bonsais, but not only, but also the philosophy behind bonsai making and Japanese culture, its history related to bonsai. So because of COVID, it's not easy to do face-to-face cultural events, but nowadays we do through online capability, this kind of cultural events. And of course, we promote people-to-people ties through studying abroad, inviting Japanese people, specialists to train Georgians, or inviting Georgian experts to be part of the training sessions in Japan. So that's all. Thank you very much for your attention, and I welcome your questions. Didi Maduro.
Thank you,
Thank
Your
you.
Excellency, for this wonderful and very comprehensive talk. Now I'd like to pass floor to our audience. I will just remind you that we have approximately half an hour for questions, comments, and I see that the first raised hand here, Professor Oliver Reisner, please.
I just wanted to applaud. So this was the clutching hands. So thank you very much for the interesting
I said that it was-
presentation.
Mhm.
Maybe, but once you named me, maybe you could tell a little bit what, of course, since we are here in a university, tell about academic cooperation between Japan and Georgia. I think this would also very interesting.
Mhm.
Thank you. Do I have to answer each question, or
I think we can collect like
okay?
3 questions and then we can start answering them. So we have one question in the chat. Can Mr. Ambassador share with us his thoughts on a progress regarding Japan Geo Free Trade Agreement? So this is the second question. Okay. So please, dear Ambassador, can you just stop sharing your screen that we see other participants as well? So there are some questions in the chat. The another question is, thank you for, I will just read it. Thank you for an insightful lecture. To what extent post-Second World War US support contributed to the rebuilding of Japanese economy and establishment of the democratic political system? So I think we can start, dear Ambassador, answering these questions. So the first question was regarding the academic contacts between 2 countries. The another one was about the US role in Japan's economic and political development, let's say so. And the another one was about Japan-Georgia Free Trade Agreement, if I'm not mistaken.
So about academic cooperation, I would say maybe academic cooperation in the area of natural science is more developed than social science. And I cannot name concrete subject matters, but I remember there were cases like physics, or dealing with the seismology, which is earthquake science, because both of us are very prone to earthquakes. Maybe a little bit of in the area of archaeology, because you have this very old history, and human beings were here from the very beginning. So these are the natural science cooperation in the academic field. In the social and humanitarian sciences, I think I would say history, linguistics. Just to give you an example of linguistics, we used to have one specialist. We almost all the time we have somebody from academia working at our embassy, and this person whose name is Mr. Kojima, he has already left, but he's living in Tbilisi, and he's a specialist in Georgian language. So he works remotely as a lecturer of Tokyo Foreign Tokyo University of Foreign Studies as a teacher of Georgian language. And he has been contributing to Japan-Georgia linguistic exchange. He has published first edition of Japan-Georgian dictionary. So this is one example. Another one, I would say, I think we have very little cooperation in international relations, which many of us today are specialized in. And as recent as actually, was it yesterday or day before yesterday, we had a first online meeting between specialists on international relations of Georgia and Japan on different platforms. This was a Rondelli Foundation and Japan International Institute for International Affairs. So I think they will, this is not publicized yet, but I think they will publish the fact that this took place, and from both sides, specialists in Caucasus or specialists in international relations, specialists in international politics in Asia were participants. But to my knowledge, this was probably virtually almost the first time that we got together. So I hope I answered at least partially of your questions. Then about Japan-Georgia Free Trade Agreement, I would say we would prefer multilateral free trade agreements like Japan-EU, or the one that I mentioned, Japan, China, South Korea, ASEAN countries, India, Australia, New Zealand. We call this RCEP agreement, but all these mega free trade agreements are more effective. Why? Why is it? Why don't we sign Japan-Georgia? Because if you look at Japan-Georgia trade statistics, it's very small. But if you look at our, if you look around in Tbilisi, you see so many Japanese cars. Why is this gap? Because many of Japanese brands are produced overseas. You remember I said that Japanese investing in overseas, so made in X by Japan. So many of our cars are produced in Turkey, for example, or in Europe, in United Kingdom, in North America, even in Russia and China. So they're coming from those countries. So it doesn't reflect in our bilateral trade. So it's not so effective to liberalize bilateral trade, whereas you're importing more of Japanese goods from other countries. That's why we need a multilateral mechanism. I would say that is the answer, more economically efficient way of trade liberalization. I wouldn't deny from the beginning of the efficiency, but I think a multilateral scheme is more effective. And third question was about the US assistance after the war. Yes, I already answered many of the questions, many parts of this question, but democratic reforms are mainly under this through the drafting of this US drafted Japanese constitution. And it really democratized very much. It revived the democratic tendencies we used to have in 1910s and 20s. And other than what I've told you, the dissolution of Zaibatsu, the economic monopolies, maybe I would draw your attention to labor movement. So we didn't have strong labor movements because of the fear in 1930s about the communism. But of course, communism and labor movements are two different things. And despite of the fact that communism in Asia was very strong, and that at the time of early 1950s or sometime at the end of 40s and beyond, under US leadership, we liberalized and established free trade unions. So there were a huge number of strikes, demonstrations against the government. At that time, we had a huge amount of high rate of inflation. I forgot how high it was, like, well, I don't know, 1,000% or even more. I don't remember the figures, but of course that will that hit the people's lives. So people were demonstrating against this kind of situation or hardship, in addition to the devastation of the war. But the expression of the free expression of people's wills were done also through free trade unions. So that's another example. So I hope I answered many of the questions. Thank you.
Okay, so as I see, our audience prefers to put the questions in the chat, so I will continue reading some of them. So the next question, dear ambassador, is about work ethics in Japan. So can you elaborate more on this? Another question looks at the issue of Japan-Russia relations and the subject of the Kuril Islands. So this is the next question. And the third question is, should we discuss FOIP alternative to OBOR, so free and open Indo-Pacific as an alternative to Belt and Road Initiative? What are the main differences between these projects? What do you think? Is it possible to implement these projects after the pandemic in the situation when every country has economic crisis? So these are the next two questions.
Yes, thank you for the very interesting questions. About work ethics, as I said, we're so workaholic industrials, or we love to work. Sometimes we work too much, so it makes your personal life a little bit miserable. So nowadays we try to keep this balance between your private life and your professional life, but that's one very typical aspect. And second aspect is, as I said, is how we make decision-making practice. So we prefer not to be confrontational. So we love consensus, and we do not necessarily express our opinions if it's confrontational to your superiors or other colleagues in your group or in your working environment. So in short, we love harmony in our organization. So, but having said that, these are the work ethics we have, but there are pros and cons. Actually, this was successful. It was a very useful work ethics during the end of this period of our success, our first part of today's presentation. But now it is becoming obstacle, at least part of our obstacles, when we look at the second phase of our post-war history, the challenges we're now facing. Why? Because in the current economic environment of globalization, I think we need to express ourselves more clearly. Otherwise, we are not being understood. The reason why we are very quiet, like harmony, is one of the reasons is that we are maybe homogeneous to a great extent, and Japanese, of course, we use Japanese language. So amongst Japanese, it probably is very easy to understand without speaking too much. But if we have a globalization and more diversified society, different ethnicities, different background, different genders, then you need to have more articulacy. You have to present yourself more clearly and more transparent way. And that's, I think, is the source of innovation, source of new growth. In Japan and elsewhere, statistics tell us that if your organization is more diversified, then you can be more profitable in terms of business. So I would say our work ethics now also facing this challenge. Maybe you don't have to work hard, but you have to think hard so that you can express your opinion more understandably, more in a transparent manner, and you can, lead others, maybe leadership, not to suppress others, but show the leadership for maybe changing the direction of your organization and things like that. Harmony is well valued still in Japan, but if we value too much and avoid intentionally confrontation, then maybe we start to sink. Our goal of our group or our organization will not be ambitious enough. If we want to put high enough ambition as your goal of your organization, then you might have to be a little bit more aggressive, more individualistic, more articulate in your own opinion. So that's kind of a dilemma that our work ethics are now facing. Next question, Japan, Russia, Kuril Islands issue. We don't call Kuril Islands because under our peace treaty with United States and other countries other than Soviet Union, we said we renounce Kuril Islands. And we say Kuril Islands don't include 4 northern islands. That's our policy. So we call these 4 islands that was ours from the very beginning and never become foreign islands, foreign territory, northern territories. So we demand these northern territories ever since the occupation by Soviet Union in August 1945. It's more than 75 years ago. And our relationship has been developing ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Our negotiations on the sovereignty over these islands were intensively conducted. We are now having people-to-people exchange between the current islanders and former islanders. This Stalin, directed all Japanese. It was like 17,000 Japanese living in those 4 islands to evacuate after the Soviet occupation. So they had to come to Japan-controlled territories. But after 1992, they are now allowed to visit these islands under non-visa, non-passport regime that we agreed with Moscow. So these exchanges are now going on, but the question of the sovereignty of these 4 islands is not resolved yet. Our policy is to resolve the question of these islands. Of course, we claim these islands as ours, and if we resolve the question of sovereignty, we think we say that we can sign the peace treaty with Russia finally. We did normalize our relations in terms of termination of war status in 1956 and other issues, but we were not able to resolve the issue of territory in 1956 ever since until now. So we were not able to sign peace treaty, according to which we signed peace treaty with other countries, but not with Russia. Now, so that's Japan-Russia relations. Next question, the FOIP and Belt and Road Initiative. Our relations, our attitude towards Belt and Road Initiative is that we are ready to cooperate with Belt and Road Initiative, but we ask the people who join the initiative to construct high standard infrastructure, high quality infrastructure. That's our policy. Because we were observing cases when the infrastructures like roads, ports has become a heavy burden for the recipient countries. Like it's not just only financial burden, but also environmental burden or social burden. It had negative impact on the environment or social equality and so forth. So nowadays, not just Japan, but many of the countries or international financial institutions like World Bank or EBRD or ADB, all these banks are financing in accordance with these important principles. And we hope that the parties to BIR, the Belt and BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, also observe these principles. And under FOIP, of course, we are advocating these principles, but it's not just the infrastructure. I said that the values really matter. Maritime security really matter. Free and open order based on international law really matters. So these other elements are also part of FOIP. It's wider than just initiative. I think Belt and Road Initiative more or less concentrate on infrastructure, physical infrastructure on the ground. Of course, they also, I know that Chinese are advocating other sectors, but maybe for the sake of time, I will just omit that part, but that's my short answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I proceed to other questions, I'd like now to ask Zaza Shaoshadze from the audience. I see the raised hand for the question, please.
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, I want to thank you for your interesting and comprehensive presentation and for all the contributions that your country is making towards ours. And my question is, we definitely, from a small developing country's perspective, we definitely benefit from this cooperation. But my question is, how will Japan benefit from small developing countries such as Georgia?
Okay, thank you, Zaza. I will read two more questions, dear Ambassador, from the chat. So the next question is from the student who is interested in terrorism and counter-terrorist studies. The question goes that what kind of the effect did the Tokyo Sarin subway attack back in 1995 had over the Japan's security agenda? So that's the second question. And the third question looks at the importance of the agricultural reform. So what type of agricultural reforms were carried out in Japan alongside with the technological and other type of innovations that country pursued?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of Japan's benefit in assisting countries like Georgia, first of all, I would say maybe 3 or 4 aspects. One is historical. You know, as I said, United States assisted us very much in terms of democratization. They also assisted us in terms of economic reconstruction. And not just the United States, but also other countries, advanced countries, and World Bank as well. So if you look at our highways in Tokyo, it was financed by World Bank. And we finished repaying somewhere around the 2000s. So it's amazing that it took, I don't know, almost 40 years to pay back. But of course, we remember how much we were helped by international community. So our memory tells us that we should pay back to by helping the developing nations, including nations in South Caucasus like Georgia. So that's kind of a historical memory reason. And the second reason is strategic. Of course, Georgia has its geostrategically important location, which we think is important to support. So we many times use the word connectivity. It's almost like infrastructure, but Georgia's function as connection between Asia and Europe is strategically so important that we cannot ignore. And so that's why we're assisting your infrastructure and your connectivity, strengthening your connectivity, especially under this your pressure that you're feeling, under Russia. I think and this value that we share, the democracy, is so precious that we cannot, see Georgia in trouble and sliding backwards in terms of democratization or in terms of enhancing, this potentially very important logistical function. So that's a strategic reason. And there are other reasons, maybe a more universal reason, like SDGs. The SDGs, it's Sustainable Development Goals, and that is very comprehensive. So I will not go into the details, but United Nations-led SDGs is very much something that we contributed and we supported in forming it. So there are a lot of cases that we can apply SDG concepts in Georgia. So we, of course, help schools, clinics, farmers. All these relates to SDGs for food production, better health, equal education to everybody, all those concepts. And in SDGs, there are very important elements that we promote, which is not necessarily clearly said in SDGs, but one of the major concepts in Japanese development assistance policy is human security. When you say security, if you're student of international relations, you always think it's state security. But of course, we care about state security of any country and ourselves, but we care about also human security. And we think that unless human security is guaranteed, it's going to be a violation of human rights, for example, or it's going to be poverty for each individual, and it will lead to difficulties, lack of capabilities to survive for each one of us. So even if state security is intact, very strong state, if in each individual is weak, that is not, the ideal situation. So we promote human security in our assistance program, including programs in Georgia. And last reason is probably business. Of course, through development assistance, we want to promote better business environment created in recipient countries. And of course, it's free competition. So not just only Japanese business, for all business coming to developing nations, including Georgia, is important. But of course, we do this, also in order to create good environment for business, including Japan. So those are the reasons. Next question about sarin attack in Japan in 1990s. So it impacted very gravely. Of course, our two internal security organizations were involved, which is a police organization, but also our public safety or security organization is very much strengthened and following this kind of cult organizations that may have potential to resort to this kind of violent, attack. So they are very much enhanced in terms of surveillance and their capability. Also, of course, people's awareness went up very much. We still, conduct annual memorial. I think that was in March. Every year when the day of attack comes, then we do a memorial ceremony in the subway station where many people died. So people's mind, we still remember very much. So people's mind has changed. And I think because of this cult group, people's mind become very cautious about this kind of potential, and they are quite aware of the danger of this kind of organization. Until then, maybe people's mind were a little bit more relaxed. They're not so much concerned about this kind of activities, but not anymore. Thirdly, maybe in terms of if you read Japanese novels, even there are cases where writers were affected by this event and they write about this. So even in the sphere of literature, it created interesting works, and even Haruki Murakami wrote a piece called Underground. It was based on the interview of many large number of people, Japanese people who were affected by this, and he created this work. I don't know how many of you have read this. I think it's translated into English. Professor, I missed the third question. What was it?
The third question was about the if I'm not mistaken, about agricultural reforms. So what kind of the agricultural reforms did Japan undertake alongside with technological innovation? So
yes, okay, I will divide into two. The reform in the post-war era, and then challenges that we're facing now. Reforms right after the war, again led by United States, is to create free farmers. Almost sounds like a 19th century Russian Empire, but before the war, we used to have big farmers, farm owners, and hiring many numbers of poor farmers. So the landlord hired small-scale farmers who were actually hired people. But after the war reforms, we tried to abolish and divide the assets into and provided them to individual farmers. So this was, and the lands were given to those who actually use those lands to raise the vegetables and food. And then recently, after the development of all these agricultural products, we are now facing the age of liberalization in agricultural market. As you said, as I said, under FOIP, we said we promote free trade agreements. And in many cases, of course, the agriculture is a matter of a very difficult discussion, because oftentimes one country is promotion of export of very competitive agriculture products to other countries, and often case the other side weak in agriculture production, so they would like to defend its production by not lowering the tariff for agricultural products. And in case of Japan, until recently, or even in many cases until now, we are defenders of agricultural products, especially in case of rice or let's say wheat, sugar, pork, and beef. These are so-called five sacred, we even say, five sacred areas of agricultural production that is very difficult, almost impossible to lower the tariff when we agree with other countries in terms of within the free trade agreement deals. So, but you know, in other areas other than these five sacred areas, there are of course other areas like you know, vegetables, for example, or fruit. So we're now gradually or rapidly changing our policies to promote exports of our food. So this is the current challenge, and we are partially becoming successful in terms of what amount of our food. We are still net importer of our food, so we're very much dependent. Our actually independent rate, that means we only import, we are self-reliant by only 35 or 40%. 40% of our food consumption is produced domestically. and we import other 70% or 65% from abroad. So we want to change this situation to export our goods, more self-reliant on domestic production. But that's the challenge. But this is coming from the globalization through conclusion of our free trade agreements with other partners. So I hope I answered you.
Thank you, dear Ambassador. I think we are running out of the time, but with your permission, I'd like to ask you one last question. So this is the question related to the situation in Japan regarding the COVID pandemic. So what's the situation right now in the country, and what is the strategy that the government or the country as a whole pursues against towards the pandemic?
So thank you for the question. So the situation, I would say, if we compare to European countries, the absolute number of infected people is relatively low. It's less than 1%. So it's somewhere between 0.5% and 1%. So much lower. But of course, relatively speaking, we have, of course, ups and downs. So we're now experiencing fourth wave. And we're now experiencing a almost total replacement of original type of virus with new mutant virus. So experts say the speed of infection is rather higher, and younger people having more serious symptoms. So this is now a huge challenge for us right now. And in order for the strategy, maybe twofold. One is to cope with, of course, limiting our daily lives. So we announced emergency measures for the third time since since the end of April, and we're now expanding the areas, geographical areas of applicable to this applying this measures, expandingly. And second measures, of course, same with other countries, is to vaccinate people as fast as possible. So in terms of vaccination, we are very slow because we are having a huge number of people, 125 million people. And we have about 4 million medical staff. So this morning I heard the news that about 70% of our medical staff was already vaccinated for the first shot, but not many as such in terms of second shot. We started that in February with Pfizer. And then we started vaccinating elder people in April. But as I said, we have 36 million people over 65 years old. So we have vaccinated only less than 1% of them, very few numbers. And we are very cautious in approving Moderna and AstraZeneca. So only yesterday, I think, or today even, finally, we approved these two, I think today. So we already secured the necessary numbers of doses, so they're coming. But because of our very cautious approach toward the side effects and our approach that we need to test Japanese people in order to give the necessary trial, and because of the few numbers of Japanese who can use for test trial, because not many are infected. You have to use infected Japanese for comparing with other people, not infected when you trial the vaccines. So we needed a longer time than Europe because those are made in Japan, made in Europe or made in the United States and not tested with Japanese. So those reasons are the main reasons of the delay, but that's the part of our main strategy. One thing we're now doing, starting quite soon, is to open a huge vaccination center in the center of big cities so that they can book and come. It's not a hospital, but it's operated by our self-defense force. So another function of self-defense force, you can see. So they will be, they have their own doctors, medical staff, so they will start to vaccinate in a large scale way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, dear Ambassador. I think we can go, we can move towards concluding our meeting. I would like to thank you for very interesting and very comprehensive and thought-provoking lecture. Thank you for your time. And I believe that we will have other opportunities as well for future and further collaboration. And we have already discussed some of the possible avenues of cooperation between Embassy and Ilya State University and the universities in Japan, which can support strengthening of our academic programs, especially in the fields of international relations, towards the integrating new module on East Asia into our existing program of international relations. And we are already working on that idea, and we hope that we will get, we are already getting, but we will get more support towards this initiative from your side and from the side of the embassy. So I'd like to thank our audience for their very active participation. The number of participants was more than around 100. That is really good. So it means that there was huge interest toward this lecture. And thank you to our students, to our colleagues. Dear Ambassador, if you would like to say some words in the end, and we can finish with that.
Yes, thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and I really appreciate your very interesting questions. I hope I answered you in a satisfactory manner. And I look forward for future cooperation with your university, with your professors. We discussed this a little bit earlier, and I hope in your university there'll be more students interested in study the international relations in Asia, including Japan. Also interested in studying Japanese language, culture, history, and so forth. So thank you very much once again for your participation and your interest.